All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of Qumulex Radio. I am Josh. This is Aaron, who is on one side or the other of your screen. I'm never quite sure. Um, so, uh, Welcome back. Happy Monday. Might be Monday night by the time I actually get this posted, but it is Monday morning for us. And we actually thought a really interesting topic to kind of kick off a Monday morning with is customer feedback. For any of us that work on the manufacturing side, it's especially important. But to be honest, I think if you're an integrator, I think feedback is also super important. So understanding customer feedback, how to get customer feedback, can be really critical to understanding whether your customers are satisfied with what you're doing. Some of the best ideas for how to make your product or your service better, I think, is understanding what the customers are looking for. And I happen to also believe that this is one of the most overlooked and underutilized aspects of everyone's business, whether you're an integrator, whether you're a manufacturer. I think we all feed the line to our customers about customer feedback. Um, but I think, only the truly best, really do an amazing job of collecting that feedback. And, even in our case, I think we do a pretty good job with that, but always thinking of ways that we can do better. Um, so Aaron, I guess, what are your thoughts on, what are the best ways to get customer feedback? Like, say, if you're a manufacturer or an integrator, for that matter.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like there's, one tried and true method, and that's really, direct kind of interviews, if you will. Um, where you kind of like an after action, after post install, maybe after the burn in, of the system, you're then talking to the end user, making sure everything's good, that they're satisfied with training, that the system's doing everything that they would expect out of it, from the sales talks and what have you. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. There's definitely some shifts. I kind of see in the industry. We're kind of taking the whole Facebook, not analytic and user data per se, but like you're seeing a lot more kind of help menus within the software, and there are analytics to kind of keep tabs on when users are engaging with those help tools, as well as
Mhm.
like the chat bots and what have you. So that's definitely kind of up and coming. I would say I'm definitely seeing that, even like CRM software, stuff like that, just everyday interactions. There's always that kind of chat bot lingering or help button lingering in the bottom corner. But yeah, for us it's more of a hands-on approach for sure. Getting that data. I don't really see any alternatives around it. It's where you get like the most um blunt, to the point, user feedback. It's just through that interview. What are you observing?
Yeah, you brought up some interesting points there. So certainly, like, um, since we use Google Cloud to host our platform, we do have access to some Google Analytics that can, with some setup, and you need some knowledge to understand how to interpret. But yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point. Some of the feedback is not necessarily where they're consciously aware. We're seeing areas where maybe they get stuck, or maybe they're looking for that help menu, which helps us understand that maybe, an area in the app is not as clear or concise as we thought it was. So that's an interesting point I hadn't thought of. Um, but I was going to say, this is one of the areas where I think this talk about moving to AI is a little overly optimistic because, if you think about, everybody wants to go to a chat GPT prompt now, for example, or,
Sure.
they want to automate things. I have found that every time I try to do something, and maybe the automation there is the key, but at some point, if you're providing the input, you're providing the input. So whether you use AI to create a survey, for example, or whether, like I did, I sat for 2 days and built a survey in SurveyMonkey, you're still needing the customer then to provide that input. And one thing I have found is that people want to provide the feedback, but they provide it in a conversation. So I think that there's no replacement for, you talk about that interview. I feel like that's where a salesperson, having a real live salesperson and not just an automated experience, is so beneficial, because they receive a lot of that feedback and, usually pretty good about giving it. I think everywhere I've worked, I feel like the salespeople are very good about, saying, hey, this is what customers are asking for. This is what they're saying. And then it's more for the product team to try to put the context on that feedback and understand, does it mean what it seems to mean at face value, or is it hinting at a different issue, or what have you. But I've noticed that, like with surveys, I mean, we abandoned that effort. I mean, if you send a survey out to, 1,200 people, I think we got like 7 responses.
Right.
And they weren't very helpful. So if you ask people, if you make it a task rather than a relationship, they'll see it as a task and they'll just not want to do it. So I think you have to make it easy. I think it has to come with the relationship. But I think what is most important is, how you're capturing that feedback and how you're measuring that feedback. And then somebody with a clear head. And that's part of the challenge of being like a product manager. I guess I'm obviously seeing this from my own eyes now, but you have to see that feedback and then you have to understand the context of it. People ask for a lot of things, but then do they understand what the result of that is? And is that why are they asking that?
Sure.
There may be something that you could do for them that they're not even thinking of that would make that experience better. Versus if you take everyone's feedback at exactly face value, you could end up with a bit of a Picasso, so to speak, where things don't really fit together. So it's actually a very important topic, but it's a bigger challenge, I think, than most people realize. And the hardest part is also people give a lot of feedback. It's very discouraging if they don't see any result from that.
Sure.
So I feel like if customers see, hey, I made this suggestion, and then 6 months later, that suggestion is a feature, I think they feel really good about that. And I feel like they feel a connection to that product or service. Like I said, that's not just for us, as a manufacturer or a SaaS provider, but also as an integrator. If your customer, maybe it's the way that you do the billing, maybe it's the way that the appointment is scheduled, whatever it may be. There's lots of different areas where you're, impacting your customer. And if they provide input and they see a change that is what they want, then that's a huge positive impact. But the reality is everybody is different. So everybody has different things that they want. So, I think it's also key somehow in that process that they know that their feedback is being heard.
You make a really good point, about the whole Picasso imaging, where you're basically saying we can't be everything to everybody. I did think about another method that we passively collect data, unknowingly, and that's through our support tickets. So when somebody is banging their head on the same issue, or they are, experiencing the same problem, like, for example, I don't have an exact timeline in my mind, but let's say it was about 6 months ago where we added a lot more data to our gateway page, because before you'd have to navigate through several menus to see certain things. And then we kind of brought that to the forefront. So now you can see, all your drives or IPs all from the gateway page. And that was, like a pain point that we passively picked up, just through support calls and how-tos. And, we can also see how many times our knowledge base articles are getting pinged, and there's also a comment section in there, but yeah, no, you made a really valid point. If we did everything that everybody was asking for, then it might kind of steer the product in ways that, it's not good for everybody. It's maybe good for that one person. So yeah, you're right. It's a super fine balance. And, not only that, but we also have limited resources. So it's like, we have to, it's that juggling of prioritizing and, kind of doing what's best, for the company, for the customers, for our partners, what's next. That's absolutely a challenge. I don't, I'm not jealous of your role by any means. That's a very hard job to navigate. But yeah,
That's fun. I enjoy it. But I think, it requires a lot of discipline, to have a way that it's organized and tracked. And then also, and, for a manufacturer, typically it's going to be a product manager or similar role that is then going to go to engineering and say, okay, this is the feedback, and you kind of have to be that connective tissue or that glue, between the different parts of the organization. As an integrator, it really just depends on how your organization is structured. I mean, and there are many, many variations of that. You could be, a small or large, one location type operation. You could be regional, you could be national or international. You could be national top down or bottom up. It's whoever is making the decisions, on the process and the policy, they're the audience. So there's no one way that it looks, but somehow, you need to be gathering from that sales team the real information that customers are providing, as well as performance of certain services or products. And then, you have to have a good process to accept that information and sort it and filter it. And then you have to present a compelling case to whoever's making the decision, whether it's engineering, building a product, or, whether it's the operations team of a large integrator, to understand that maybe there's a better way that they could operate, or ways that they could be more efficient or do things that impact a customer positively. But I think it's something everybody aspires to. I think everybody says that, do you ever run into a company that says we don't listen to our customers?
I think we both have run into one before.
yeah, we have. Yeah, we've all run into it, but nobody ever says it, right? I mean, that's
right.
Nobody ever wants to take that approach. So it's something that's, easier said than done, but is so important. I mean, what do you think is frequently, I guess, maybe a place where feedback falls apart? Or, I mean, why do you think some organizations just don't take feedback very well?
No, you're right. I mean, part of it, I think, is, maybe there's some ego built into that. I know it sounds kind of funny, but I think it's a real factor. When you have like a technology team, let's say from the CTO down, they will, they have this grand vision, right? And they're like, hey, this is what the market needs. Maybe they see a hole, and they're trying to capitalize on that. But then what they're receiving from the actual field, from the sales team, like you're saying, it's something different. And maybe then they think, hey, I know better, you don't know better. And
well,
then
that's interesting, because I almost feel like at that point, there's a disconnect between the vision of the product or the integrator versus what sales is trying to sell.
Sure.
So that's an interesting perspective too, where I could say, okay, is that really arrogance, or is that saying, hey, we built something to be a solution or to solve a certain problem for, a certain type of scenario or customer. And then if sales is bringing you things and they're trying to make you something else, then
yeah.
The question is like, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that the mission should change? And maybe it isn't appealing necessarily to the group that you expected, but there's another, vertical, we'll just call it for lack of a better term, because it may be too specific for what we're saying here, but should they maybe switch tracks and say, okay, well, maybe we're building the right thing, but for the wrong people. And so we need to accept this feedback. Or do they need to go back to the sales leaders and say, hey, I don't think we're selling to the right people?
Sure. No, I mean, you make some amazing points. I think each of those is probably a 30-minute conversation, but
Yeah.
to kind of summarize to just the top level, I would say that, every successful business needs to be able to pivot. They need to be able to change, what they're doing, at a moment's notice. For example, I don't want to sidetrack from the core point, but yes, that if you're not changing, you're not evolving, then you're basically falling static in the marketplace. You have no real value. You're not bringing anything to the customers, the partners. So I don't want to go down that rabbit hole because I definitely feel the conversation could go there. But just to kind of bring it back some, you made like a really good point, just talking about like, well, you're getting all this feedback from the sales team, for example, in this kind of scenario. What do you do? We can't be everything to everybody. We can't do everything. So then it's like, yeah, then you kind of make some people mad, because maybe what they're suggesting is pulling you off track. This is not what the product necessarily specializes in. This is not the problem that we solve, but we're getting pulled there based on opportunity, for example. That's an incredibly frustrating process, and I see it firsthand. We see it firsthand. I mean, look at all the things that we're tracking, that are opportunity driven, and I think, just to kind of be specific here, I think Qumulex, we've done a really good job of, hey, we weren't initially targeting any verticals. We were trying to be commercial and just kind of vertical agnostic, just to appeal to the most people. And then, we started to go down some of these tracks where we were starting to almost specialize in certain verticals. And it's great for business, right? It was attracting more opportunities in those various sectors, but then at the same time it was starting to make us very specialized. And again, it's a hard job, you know what I mean? Like, to be relevant, you have to evolve. You can't, and you got to take that feedback, and everything we're doing right now, I think is from a Qumulex perspective is correct and true, because we are listening to our customers. We're gathering this feedback. We're advancing both our video core product and our access control product. And sorry, I'm trying to dance around some things so that way we don't turn this into a 1-hour podcast. But
No, I think we do. If you look at each of our, we put out an email notice typically describing the new features in our update before they come out, and also to let you know when the update's going to happen. And I feel I'm running out of ways to saying, here's these new features that are a direct result of your feedback.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I do think that we're doing a good job of listening. But again, it's always a balance where, okay, but we're getting a lot of feedback, which is great. It shows that there's a lot of interaction out there with sales, and there's a lot of different opportunities that are coming our way, which is good. But then we do have to, again, it's just, I guess in the end, maybe the real answer to all of this is that the key to managing the feedback is really part of having just a good overall strategy. Where are we trying to go? What are we trying to be? And then understanding how the feedback relates to that. And then to your point, if I start off selling lobsters, but I'm catching tuna like crazy, then at some point you start to say, okay, my real goal is that I want to be in a boat and I want to be in the ocean 8 hours a day, and I want to catch things in the ocean and sell them. And, do I advance at all costs on the lobsters I'm not catching? Or do I turn around and say, okay, how do I make this tuna catching operation better? Because I keep catching tuna, and tuna pays well too. So, I think that's the two things that you're balancing. You do have to have a strategy, and you do have to have a vision and have a direction you're going, so you don't end up a Picasso, but then also not be rigid at the same time.
Absolutely. You summarized it perfectly.
So this stuff is not easy, by the way.
By no
It
means.
is a tremendous balance that you have to have, but I think that's also fun. And I think the world we're in now, it's so much easier to communicate and to sort and track information that I think that is okay. I don't think that should be seen as a problem or a struggle. It's just part of doing business, and um, managing that well has a tremendous amount to do with the success that you will have or not.
Yeah.
So, but
It's an
it's
addicting
a
process.
balance that never
Yeah,
ends, right?
right.
I mean,
Exactly.
that will always be the case. Maybe, you brought up earlier, maybe sometimes feedback isn't taken because of arrogance, and I'm sure that happens out there. And I'm sure there are instances where it goes beyond just having a good, clear vision of where they want to go, where that's, to me, not arrogance. But there probably are times where it's like, okay, well, our product is amazing, or our integrator outfit is amazing, so we don't care what you say. I'm sure
Sure,
that
right.
does happen, but I'll bet you that's small. I mean,
Sure.
if I had to guess, I'll bet that is a small percentage that find themselves in that place. And I'll bet in almost every case they fail.
Yeah.
I don't see how you can be successful long term with that
You can't
approach.
thrive in a vacuum for sure. You gotta hear the feedback. The end user feedback is absolutely critical, because I mean that's the customer at the end of the day, and partner feedback is important, but I would put it second to end user feedback. Um, I don't know, partner and customers have the same problems, but it's definitely tracked differently.
Yeah, I think for us, it's channel. If I'm an integrator, it's customers. If, you know, Walmart, Target, everybody, they always have surveys. I mean, everybody's trying to hear what the customer wants. So I think, you know, I think the amount of volume you have has a big impact on how easy or hard it is. And I think
Sure.
in either case, you could say, okay, we don't have a ton of feedback, so it's easy to sort through. But then at the same time, you're not getting probably as much of a perspective. And then if you're getting a lot of data, if you're a very large company like Target, who wants to know what I think about everything every time,
Sure.
I go to
Sure.
Target twice a year, and I get a ton of surveys and questions, and the app pops up. Hey, how was that? Was that checkout easy? They're always trying to figure out what my mood is after shopping there. They're going to have a ton of feedback, right? Because they're huge. So they're
Yeah.
creating a lot of data, and they're sorting through a lot of data. So there's a lot there. There's a lot of opportunity for them to learn, but then it forces them to use, different technology or different processes to manage and sort that correctly. So I think in the end, it's having a method, having a desire. And I think that could look a little different for everybody. For us, we use a product called Asana, which is a SaaS-based product, which is very similar to AHA and a lot of those that you may hear about that. That it helps us just kind of collect and record, but it takes that desire, that effort to get it, and to care that it gets entered, and that we care that it gets reported.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So in the end, I guess this just isn't one of those clean ones where we say, here's step 1, 2, and 3.
Oh, it's
And this will
incredibly
work for
messy
everybody.
and complicated. Yeah. Absolutely.
Interesting. Well, it feels like just a loose thread that we're ending on here, but I would
Yeah.
say in the end, hearing the feedback is super important. But in my personal opinion, having the context of what the feedback really means, that is important to me above all. Here's what we're hearing, trying to understand why we're hearing that, trying to understand what the impact really is, and to try and make good decisions for the customer so that they can be happy, I think is critical above all.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
All right, I win again. So that will be the end. That is it for this week's podcast. We do have some guests that we're lining up for future episodes, so we hope you join us. And until then, we'll see you next time.